we're gonna start with Mark's input there. So if I'm starting on Mark's Microsoft Copilot project, how best can I set up for success?
Well, it could either be myself or David could answer that one, but or Jan, you're talking as well. The very first thing is, be open and transparent. What are your goals? What is it that you're actually trying to achieve? As an organization, because this is a technology that is going to be very disruptive, potentially in a very good way, but it could also be a very divisive one, particularly in an organization that's a mature organization with lots of different demographics. You can end up creating a divide in the organization. So the first thing is coming back to principles. What is the reason for doing it? And hopefully that reason is we want everybody to have Friday afternoons off. So anybody joining the engagement is that. Another one might be, and this can be a transparent thing, let's say if I think of HSBC, you probably have quite a lot of different demographics, people also in their early 60s who maybe are looking at retirement at 65, maybe say you're 62, you can retire in 12 months if you're contributing all of your knowledge into our essentially SharePoint or database that Copilot can look at, and then you are going to be afforded early retirement as though you had reached 65. So incentivizing people. There certainly will be plenty of instances where there's companies are looking to do it for the purely ruthless capitalist reasons, and they're going to have difficulties because people are not stupid. They know the rationale. So without saying too much more, it's very much about the first principles. What is it that you're really trying to achieve? The second thing that I'd say is also look at what's happening in your organization at the moment. Like if I look at one example, Copilot for Outlook, that's a way for you to look far quicker at a whole batch of emails and maybe miss something that is of relevance. If you're, as Jan was saying, if you're receiving 150 emails a day, 200 emails a day, that's indicative of a culture either of low trust or that is lacking in systems, and people are firing emails left, right and centre because they don't have a process to follow. So that's something to be addressed first, because while a younger demographic may be able to sort of get a handle on 200 emails a day and work through it, it's going to make it even more difficult for those who are not on Copilot. And from an event last week in Microsoft, their initial suggestion was sign up 10% of the organization for Copilot. So there's going to be the haves and the have-nots.
Do we have any questions from the room actually? Because before we go all the way into our own, do we have any questions from the room?
Yeah, so just one question about the inputs into the I'm kind of thinking about the comparisons when you're benchmarking your organization. This is on the maturity app.
Mm-hmm.
So where are those inputs coming from? Where's that data source coming from?
It comes from assessments that we do across many different organizations globally, so our own customers. So that's where it's coming from. So it's the level of depth is quite substantial for that, because they're going through quite in-depth assessments, and that's how we're creating those benchmarks.
It's possible also Nilufer didn't hear the question, but she would say in terms of for the Sustainability Maturity Index, that's from data that was available from the World Benchmarking Alliance. So that was pre-populated even at the beginning of the platform with about 480 different organizations.
And in relation to that, does the information from the users of the service, does that feed into the data?
It does, but you're not identifiable as your organization, just as your industry. Yeah, so
yeah, it's completely anonymous, of course. But yeah, all of that data is input in one place, and really we're at the beginning of a very long journey. We want to work in collaboration with our partner ecosystem as well as with organizations to produce much more specific benchmarks, right? So not just by industry, but actually by industry within a country, within sub-sector of an industry. there's a lot of directions we can go in, and this is just the beginning. So we're trying to start a movement.
Join the revolution.
Big one. Great platform. I mean, great information coming from it. A lot of manual input at the moment. We're sitting here talking about kind of digitization. Are you looking at any APIs? Are you looking at any data capture? Are you looking to get information from other sources that would effectively, I mean, if you're talking about 4-day weeks, which, hey, that's brilliant, but to try and bring down to make it usable information, constantly usable information that you can actually go in and run reports on, let's say, weekly reports, the ones that we like to see coming into our inbox without having to even think about it.
So measuring your digital maturity on a weekly basis?
Well, not so much measuring digital, well, measuring maturity, yes. Weekly, monthly, whatever. Yeah, I mean, data is part.
Yeah, but also measuring your progress. Well,
Correct.
like the one that you guys had talked about was the connection from the plan out and back to Jira, and then if it can get out to Jira, we can do the same to Microsoft Project Online. So they'd have to be written, but it's open in that regard in terms of opening it up, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that, because it's exactly what you want. Once you have established that, there's always the need to sort of reprioritize, and particularly in a fast-moving industry, there's other things you need to bring on board, and you want to be able to feed that through to whatever your project planning software is. So that's in the roadmap.
Yeah, good.
No more questions? Okay,
best time of year to visit Malta? Yeah. Anytime, is it?
Anytime.
Just whatever, I don't know if it's a valid question, but we talk about our 80% failure rate in transformation. I mean, if you do the process better, how soon can you spot the imminent failure and avoid spending time and money not achieving your ambition?
Failure is not a binary concept, so it's not the fact that you have failed completely or you succeeded completely. Most transformations are in shades of grey. Okay, so the way to go about it is actually learning from others what their experience has been. And the most fundamental concept to minimize failure is to win the support of your senior management team. So any digital transformation can only succeed if the senior management team is on board. So it is not a technology project, it's a business project. So we have to start by looking at an end-to-end process. So looking from procurement to payment, looking from receivables to sales to receivables. So it's an end-to-end process. And this creates challenges because it goes across the organization. So clearly breaking down silos and making sure that there is a proper governance system in place where you have typically using standard project management methodologies where you've got a steering committee made up of the business process owner of the project. So let's say, for example, you want to implement a new CRM system. Clearly, there needs to be a representative of the senior management team who's responsible for that. There needs to be ideally a representative of the CEO who is on that team, because you need to implement and have the power to implement what you want, and involve as many people as possible. Clearly, there is a balance that has to be achieved, because the more people you involve, obviously, the more time it takes for you to implement, but the lower is the risk of failure. So it is a delicate balance that you need to achieve. What I like to do typically is to start from quick wins, looking at low-hanging fruit, looking at easy things to achieve, and in that way, by targeting easy things to achieve, you will be gaining the acceptance of your people to move on to bigger things.
I think failure is a measure against outcome, I think, isn't it? You know, it's a perspective, so it's a matter of defining an outcome. And
Yes.
that's what you're measuring against. So a poor definition of that is a an avenue to failure. So it's
Yes.
getting the correct outcome defined at
Exactly.
the start.
In fact, to what Jan referred to earlier, the importance of measurement, you have two elements. You have where you are today and where you want to be. So your definition of success or failure is related to those 2 points. So I want to achieve, so you need to know where you are today to set realistic expectations of what you want to achieve. And by setting those realistic expectations, you can aspire to achieve them, and you know whether you are failing or succeeding. Having said that, sometimes failure is a road to success, because failure is all about learning. So it is also important in an organization not to be afraid of failure. You need to embrace failure, but with the context that failure gets you closer to your success story.
Just a question around the ownership of digital strategy.
Yes.
Who owns it within the executive? What's your sense on that?
That's an interesting question. Most organizations appoint the CIO, right, to take ownership of the digital strategy. My view is that the digital strategy ideally should be really an integral part of the business strategy. And the more we move ahead, the more the two become the same. Because many organizations, it's in a way, it's like sustainability in a way. It's also going down that route, that sustainability is not just a department, it's a whole philosophy of the organization. And it's the same thing for digital. It goes across. So the ownership from a CIO point of view, but again, it depends also on the character of the CIO. You run the risk of giving it a technology emphasis. So by putting the ownership on the CEO, you're giving it a business focus, which is going across the whole board.
We would love to see a world where a lot more CIOs become the next CEOs.
Yeah.
And that's not happening enough. So this is what we want to do. We really want to empower the CIO to have the tools to be able to influence business strategy to a much greater extent.
You can spot the CIOs in the audience, they all still smile.
To have more time to ask about, so say as a normal SME, organization, what can they do to leverage? How can they leverage technology to reach sustainability? To become sustainable. Say starting from zero, they haven't done anything.
Well, I go back to one of David's slides, and he talked about the technologies. They were described as the technologies tomorrow, but they're technologies of today. There's a phrase which is that the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. But the reality is that with access to the cloud and access to a mobile phone, you're seeing that small organizations can disrupt. They can. They don't need a massive investment as they would have needed, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. There was a barrier to entry. The reality is they can start very small, and they can leverage technologies on a pay-as-you-go basis. We see it with blockchain. You just pay what they refer to as they call them the gas fees. I think for the sustainable blockchain, they're going to have to come up with a better term than gas. But those barriers are gone because you can bootstrap things with technologies now. There's a very low barrier to entry. So that's what I'd say. I'd encourage an SME to say, they have, they don't have the barriers anymore, and the other thing is they also don't have the blockers of, let's say, a very structured large organization slowing them down. So they've no chains that they have to throw off. So I'd say it's not that how can they get to that point? They actually have right now all the advantages. So.
Is there anything there in terms of starting an SME in a sustainable model so that you don't have to break things or change things later?
Well, startups have most startups. They have another inherent advantage is that they've no cash, you know, so they can't be spending money, you know, so they don't do the sort of the big fitted out office. They essentially, you know, they're starting in a work hub like this, you know, or you know, as they said, the old out of the garage. So their footprint tends to be smaller in that regard. You know, they're not going to be, you know, flying back and forth. They're looking at a lot of sort of economic realities, and that's an intersection between the economic reality and the ecological reality. You know, and you know, I used to also argue it the other way round, is that back years ago when we were working in renewables, we always argued it was the right thing to do, but it was more expensive, and now it's come down and become the economic thing. So I see there's the intersection there. So I think if you're looking after your pennies, you're also looking after your sustainable footprint. Yeah, that's the argument I'd make.
You can take the argument a bit wider, not just from the environmental point of view, but also from from a social aspect, and even from an economic aspect. SMEs, economies, I would prefer an economy based on SMEs more than on large body corporates, because there is more resilience at an economic level to susceptibility to fluctuations in changes in the performance of companies. I come from Malta, and we used to have a couple of companies, like for example ST Microelectronics, for example, and we used to have Thompson, where their performance, specific performance, actually had a major impact on our GDP. For example, you know, with just two companies. So I think SMEs have a major role to play in creating the resilience necessary for economies to grow sustainably over a period of time. And the fact that they are small, they are more adaptable to change and use resources in a better way than their larger counterparts. So I think in that context, SMEs have an advantage over large organizations than economies.
Just one final related question then. Obviously they depend on venture capitalists and private equity firms. Is there a view on how they are accepting the sustainability agenda and investing with a view to long-term sustainability?
Well, what I can say is clean tech, for example, is getting a lot of interest from VCs on a number of fronts. One of the reasons, obviously, there are, for example, the European Union is focusing a lot on regulation, making sure that the Green Deal is implemented in an appropriate way. So, and there are also, from a financial institution point of view, the obligations to make investments in clean technologies. So clearly there is an incentive for VCs and private equity and business angels to put their money in this area, which is obviously attracting a lot of interest from different fronts.
Mary?
Yeah, just to add to that question about sort of funders and financiers, it's not just the sustainability and the governance around like supply chains and how supply chains are to be more traceable.
Yeah.
The provenance of the product or the materials. It's also AI governance. There's all the legislation around the AI that's coming in. So I think the AI maturity model that's coming along is going to be a really key element for companies that are got an AI element. Funders are just not going to put money on the table on AI.
Speaking of AI, can we have, like, if an organization wants to implement AI, like the Copilot, as soon as possible, what are the risks, and what are the, like, you know?
Well, I think that's something we covered. Like, there's very much risks in terms of the divide within the organization, but also there's the there's the risk of surfacing information that you don't want to surface. Now, Microsoft have been very careful in their architecture. It's different to ChatGPT, where whatever you key in is out there and your questions are visible outside. That stays within your Microsoft tenant. But there is the risk. I don't know if anybody had used Delve before, and that was something essentially surfaced. What is Niall working on? What is Stephen working on? And redundancy program 2022. Forgot to lock that one down. So Delve would only show you what you had the rights to see, but if people didn't manage the permissions and the governance correctly, it would show up for somebody who was looking there. Now, Copilot will surface it even more. You're working through something, bringing in information. So really the biggest risk is governance. It's about locking things down correctly, and having the permissions applied correctly, and having a proper management of starters, movers, levers. So I think that if anybody was saying we want to implement Copilot, I say, well, if you don't have ISO 27001 in place, don't start Copilot, because at least we know with that you've got your basic sort of information security management in place. So I think it'll be a boost in terms of for 27001 as well. But yeah, definitely the risks are you're trying to put something shiny and fast on top of something that's not stable. Similar to with Outlook, if people are bombarded with hundreds of emails, it could just make you go faster in the wrong direction rather than solving the problem.
If I may add to what Mark is saying, we see a continuous trend when there's technology innovation, there is a high rate of failure of organizations that go bust. And we've seen this model going through various stages. We've seen, for example, the rise of the internet. We've seen many companies replicating a brick and mortar model on the internet, on a web-based solution, and they went bust. Now we have seen about the pre-COVID stage where there was the new emergence of distributed ledger technology, okay? And we've seen the new developments where many companies at that point were replacing essentially what were essentially services based on the e-commerce model into a DLT model, and they failed as well. And what is the reason why we have these failures? The reason is that it is not enough for business to replicate an old technology and change it to a new technology and use it in the same way. The ultimate why? Because at the end of the day, your competitive advantage, everyone can do that. What not everyone can do is to use that technology and use it as an opportunity to change the business model and create something completely new. And that is what we need to do, really, with these type of technologies, to reinvent ourselves, use it as a base to reinvent ourselves and our business model and come up with something completely different from others.